From the language app Babbel, this is a bonus New Year's episode of Multilinguish. I'm producer Thomas Devlin. Every year, several different organizations put out what they consider to be the word of the year. Each organization chooses it a little differently. Merriam-Webster uses dictionary search data to see which words were looked up a significant number of times. The Society for the German Language has a panel of people choose the word, and the United Daily News in Taiwan has readers vote on a word, and so on. What usually happens is that there end up being a wide array of different words, each of which give a unique perspective on the past year. While there might be a few words of the year that cluster around the same concept, last year there were a lot of words around the climate change movement, there's usually enough diversity to cover several topics. And then 2020 happened. Every single word of the year is about the coronavirus pandemic. So rather than focusing on just the official words of the year, we here at Babbel wanted to look at the broader language trends of the year. But before we get started, a quick reminder to subscribe to Multilinguish so you never miss an episode. Joining me in the studio today are fellow producers Dylan Lyons and Jen Jordan. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Thomas.
I'm going to start by listing the words of the year, the official ones, and you two can let me know if you figure out the theme that kind of unites them all. So Collins Dictionary chose lockdown, the Australian National Dictionary Centre chose ISO, Cambridge Dictionary chose quarantine, the Society for the German Language chose corona pandemie, the Macquarie Dictionary chose doom scrolling, the Japan Kanji Aptitude Testing Foundation chose mitsu, which means close or dense, and for the first time ever, Merriam-Webster and Dictionary.com chose the same word of the year, pandemic.
I don't see any pattern at all.
None at all?
I'm sensing a slight theme.
Very, very subtle.
Yeah, so just to explain at least one of them, because mitsu, which means close or dense, is probably the slightly more obscure one. That is specifically when they were talking about sanitary conditions, they were talking about close and dense conditions is what will spread coronavirus, which is what we're going to talk about first, because I've been personally fascinated when not depressed by the news of coronavirus by just how much it's changed the language that we use, because there's this whole like COVID dictionary of terms.
Very true.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the usual ones. I personally like Blur's Day, which, as you may know, is just the kind of absence of time and all the days blurring into each other. Because you may not know this, but it's been 9 months since we all stopped working in the office.
Oh,
Oh my
boy.
god.
Yeah,
I'm so glad I took my plant with me.
I know. It's just one of those things. I feel like we all gather around the fire and tell the stories of our last days in the office and the madness that happened.
Yeah, I'm glad we're kind of explaining this in case this podcast ends up in a time capsule.
So to go through a few other corona-oriented terms, because there are quite a few that dictionaries listed. We also have coronication, corona coaster, which has to do with the emotions that we feel. There's corona baby, which is a weird one.
Is that like the baby boom?
Yeah, I guess it has been 9 months now, so I guess we will see if there's a sudden uptick in the children born.
I like the term coronials.
Yes, I was going to say there was a generational term, right? Coronials.
I'm not familiar with that one. Is that just the people who will have been born?
Yeah, like millennials, but for the corona time.
Weird. I also want to highlight a few other language terms that came up, because the Zurich University of Applied Sciences chooses 4 different languages to represent Switzerland. So they have the German Systemrelevant, which means systemically relevant, which sounds very weird, but is basically just the same as essential worker here. There's French Coronagraben, which is, it refers specifically to the fact that the different linguistic zones of Switzerland dealt with the sanitary conditions differently, and so kind of was about the weirdness of when you go from one place to another and the conditions aren't the same, which I think is something that people can relate to. If you've traveled at all this year, it's very strange to go to another state where people are not wearing masks or something when you've been doing
Florida. What?
Yes. Dylan, you went to Florida, right? It's
Unfortunately,
different there.
but I made it out alive. No
Well,
offense to any of our listeners in Florida, but they don't really follow any rules there.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely not just a United States phenomenon where it's just the situation is different and then there's just so much confusion. And again, I think the language is interesting that it's changed, but also the incredible amount of language can be extraordinarily confusing. Just to go through the last two, Italian just chose pandemia and Romansch was mascherina, which means pandemic and mask, respectively. And one of my favorites, though, that was a runner up for German was Masksünder, which means mask sinner.
They really do have a word for everything.
That's incredible.
That's the great thing about the German language. I mean, we have anti-masker, but there's something about mask sinner that's just
perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I don't want to spend the entire time talking about coronavirus because I'm sure anyone listening to this has heard enough discourse over the past years. So I wanted to take a cue actually from the Oxford dictionaries, which for the first time since their tradition began, did not choose a single word of the year. Instead, they decided to look more generally at the broader language trends, and on their list were words like coronavirus, lockdown, and social distancing, but also they have cancel culture, net zero, and a lot more. So I thought we'd all go around and share some of the words that we picked out from some of the runners up that gives us a better look at all of the trends that have happened this year. And Jen, if you want to go first.
Sure. I want you guys to think about several months ago, back in January. And in the midst of, actually, this was before Corona. I think we kind of knew it might be coming, but this was mid to late Jan. We impeached the president. Do you remember that?
Oh my God. That was this year?
That was 2020. So this word is impeachment, and it was an Oxford English Dictionary runner-up. Of course, the definition of impeachment is the process by which a legislative body addresses charges against a government official. Of course, Trump was acquitted, so he was not removed from office. And the resulting effects of the pandemic and a lot of other stuff were fought by that. It would have been a very different year had he not been acquitted. And I believe acquittal was also one of the Oxford English Dictionary words of the year, or runners up. But to keep it in a political vein, I think it's important we address the political part of the year because it was such a huge force to be reckoned with, aside from the pandemic and so many other things that happened. We have the word malarkey from Merriam-Webster, which means insincere or foolish talk. And I think Joe Biden has successfully branded himself as the no malarkey candidate. He really owns that word, for better or for worse. And
he brought it back.
Yeah, he brought it back. And it looks like it peaked right around the third presidential debate, which I think is when he pulled it out and brought out malarkey into the public forum once again. It looks like really the only times it spikes are around Joe Biden and things he has said. So it's interesting to see that it's so closely associated with him. But we have malarkey once again.
I don't think I knew that word existed before Joe Biden's run for president. And then he just kind of came out with it as though we all knew. And I was like, do we?
It's about as old as he is.
Do I have malarkey? Are we getting rid of it? What's it happening?
It makes me think of lunch meat, and I don't know why.
Oh, it
Maybe
sounds
bologna.
very like 20s, 30s, old-timey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So my last word is Karen, which comes to us as the McCary's People's Choice 2020 word. You guys, I could talk about Karen forever. It's a fascinating word in our culture. The definition is it's a derogatory word, a term used predominantly to refer to a middle-class white woman, often in Gen X, who is regarded as having an entitled, condescending, and often racist attitude. And I think the part I really want to focus on for the 2020 definition is the last part, which is the often racist attitude. I think when you look at the use of this term, Karen, the early definitions, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, were much more along the lines of like, let me speak to your manager, and all about the spiky haircut and the entitlement. And I think in May, we had Amy Cooper, who was the white woman that called the police um, on the African American birder in Central Park after he asked her to leash her dog. And she was known as the Central Park Karen. And I think that this term Karen started to become even more shorthand for somebody who is racist and entitled and privileged. So it's a really interesting word. If you're interested in the various uses of Karen, I believe that Slate's Decoder Ring has a great episode that's just about Karen. And it goes into a bunch of history about the term and where it came from. And it's really interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah, and it's a controversial one too, right? Because people on the internet, I guess mostly Karens themselves, were saying things like, this is a derogatory term, you shouldn't call people this. It's like a slur, which was interesting.
It is, but it's also, I feel terrible for people named Karen.
Yeah, that's the real victims. But let's go to Dylan next.
Sure. So my first word is kraken, which is a great word. It's fun to say. And it is one of Merriam-Webster's runner-ups this year. It is a mythical Scandinavian sea monster. And you may know it from Marvel Comics. It was in the 2010 remake of Clash of the Titans. Zeus said, "Release the Kraken," which people quote a lot. But it came up this year because Seattle got a new NHL hockey team, and they chose Kraken as their team name. And I believe it also came up again during the election relitigating, where Trump's lawyers were saying they were going to release the Kraken of evidence, which we've yet to see. But it is a fun word, and I enjoy it.
I always thought Kraken was specifically a giant squid. Is that not correct?
I think it is. It looks like a squid, but I guess it's just a sea monster that resembles a squid. I don't know if it's specifically a squid.
I guess because giant squid were kind of the first sea monsters, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what they saw out of their boats and were like, ah.
I also want to point out everyone refers to Clash of the Titans with Kraken, but I feel like Pirates of the Caribbean was so much more of my upbringing when Davy Jones had the Kraken.
Okay, so my next word is also a fun one. It is Megxit, which was a runner-up in Collins Dictionary. So it's a portmanteau of Megan and exit, and it was used to describe the withdrawal of Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, from their royal duties. They pieced out from the royal family, and of course, it's also a play off of Brexit, of Britain leaving the EU. So Megxit.
Team Meg, get out of there, especially after this last season of The Crown. Like, get out of there. It's toxic, girl.
No spoilers.
It's history, Dylan.
So my final word, which is actually 3 words, is Black Lives Matter. But the interesting thing is it was chosen as a runner-up by the Society for German Language, which I found kind of moving and nice that this German organization chose these English words as one of their potential words of the year. So for anyone who doesn't know, Black Lives Matter is a movement that encourages peaceful protesting against racial motivated violence and police brutality targeting Black people. It's been in the news a lot this year. We had the murder of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis and a lot of protesting across the country. And I think the movement is largely focused on the US, but we have seen support around the world, particularly in Europe. So I guess that is why it was also important to Germany. So I thought that was really interesting.
What I think is interesting is BLM has been active for a number of years now, but it really seems like this year was the year it went global in this way.
Hmm.
I think we've seen with like our colleagues in Europe that they're really starting to understand and talk more about this like racial and social movement. So I think it's great.
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a positive thing that people are engaging with it more than ever.
Yeah, it's also good to include this word just to show. I think even like if coronavirus had never happened, this year would still be top three wildest I've lived through. Because there is just so much that's happening. Because Black Lives Matter in June was kind of completely dominant, and just when you thought like nothing could break through the kind of noise of coronavirus, it's really heartening in a way to see so many people coming together to talk on important issues of race and diversity, both in the United States and around the world. So I chose some less serious words just because I was entertained by them for various reasons, and I thought they did reflect something about society this year. The first is Cottage Core, which is a lifestyle characterized as being rustic or old fashioned, involving pastimes including handcrafting, baking, gardening, etc. And this is from the Macquarie Dictionary Runners Up. Uh, I like the concept a lot of cottage core, and I think we were all making bread earlier, people were gardening. I think it's still related to the year, even though it's a little strange, a choice.
I actually hadn't heard of it until this year, but I started seeing it on, I think, Twitter or other like queer social media spaces in regards to like a sort of type of lesbian. I think is that
Wait, what?
another form of it, a cottagecore lesbian that was coming up a lot on Twitter.
I think that's an intersection.
Okay,
Um, and I do think that queer communities have definitely taken this a lot, possibly more than straight communities, though I'm not entirely sure. But that does sound right. As we have explored in previous podcast episodes, though, it is generally queer spaces where language change really happens.
very true.
I do think it's interesting cottage core. I feel like I at least I personally had not really heard about it until this year. And I do think it's interesting like we started thinking about more rustic and comforting ways during quarantine to kind of like yeah, like you said baking bread, gardening, buying canned goods. But I also really like it because I started getting into TikTok this year and my favorite type of TikTok is farm TikTok and homesteaders, where they
Interesting.
just yeah, like, there's, like, a video there's someone I follow where her video every morning is just her, like, saying good morning to all her animals while she lets them out. It's very soothing, and I feel like it's cottagecore adjacent.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm usually a little bit nervous around like this kind of nostalgia for the old ways. Um, because I mean, like farming is not actually that great an activity. Um, Despite some people who live in cities really idolizing it. But I do think, especially this year, just doing things with your hands was a good distraction from the rest of what was going on. So my second word is irregardless, which comes from one of the Merriam-Webster runners up and is my favorite, really, just because I think it's funny. As you might know, irregardless means the same thing as regardless, but it's a double negative, which makes some people very angry. This
Does it make you angry, Thomas? I feel like this would get you worked up.
honestly, no, I'm on the other side because I'm on the side that I just think if it's enough people have said it that just let it go and it's not going to mean the end of Western civilization. But I think it's most entertaining that this became popular this year because of actor Jamie Lee Curtis, who is famous for her roles in Halloween, Freaky Friday, and those yogurt commercials. Uh, and she claimed that it was added to the dictionary this year and that it was some horrible thing, which is actually not true because Merriam Webster clapped back, as the kids say, and mentioned they added this back in 1934.
I think that one like bothers me more than any other, just because it was like drilled into me from like a young age throughout school, like never to say it, it's incorrect. And like with most things, I'm like, it's fine. It's just how people talk. But that one like stuck with me for some reason as just like, it sounds weird.
Yeah, I had an English teacher who would really just ground her gears to hear irregardless.
Yeah.
I do get that because I think when you're like told from childhood not to do something, like, and then it's so annoying when you have to get over it later on. Like splitting infinitives was a thing for me where I really had to just change my ways
Mm.
See,
because
her disdain for it made me just want to use it more. So I
Oh,
guess it
we got a
had
little
the
rebel over here.
opposite effect on me. I really didn't like her.
Jan is a linguistic innovator. There's probably a lot of language that just happened to piss off older people, honestly.
True.
And I will end with mukbang, which is one of the Collins Dictionary runners up. And this refers to a video or webcast in which the host eats a large quantity of food for the entertainment of viewers. To check first, are either of you familiar with this?
Yeah.
Yes. But I only learned about it like maybe last year or the year before.
Have either of you watched videos?
No, thank you.
So many. There's so many. I'm so tired of YouTube serving me content that's like, Keith tries everything on the Dunkin' Donuts menu. And like, it's just like somebody who orders every single type of food and then tries to eat it on camera or tries each item and talks about it. I think it's the lamest type of content, honestly. I think it's so lazy and it's so overdone. But I apparently feel very strongly about this.
Wow.
I was not expecting that strong
Me
response,
neither.
but well, in any case, I'm including it because it's definitely a phenomenon. Like in preparing for this episode, I looked into it more, and it is it's one of those things that makes me feel like I truly do not understand certain things about society, but that's okay. For just a brief history, it was popular in Korea first, and now is popular everywhere. There's a lot of kimchi videos from what I saw in my brief searching of the internet for these, but I personally am not into it. But I thought it was interesting that apparently one of the big reasons why these are popular is that it's related to loneliness, and people will put these videos on TV when they're eating, and so
Hmm.
they're feeling like they're eating with someone.
That's interesting.
I mean, I can hard relate to that. I think the videos I see are often, they just seem so wasteful because somebody will get a whole bunch of food and you know that like they're throwing a lot of it out because how much can you really eat at once as one person? I just don't like
That's
wasting food.
that is definitely fair. I also think sometimes people make fun of this trend, but also like the Coney Island hot dog thing has been going on for years, and I find that far more disgusting than any of the
Oh God,
mukbang
yeah.
things I saw. Those disgusting hot dogs.
Ugh.
That's a
I
good
don't
point.
I don't like that at all.
Nothing's new is my general ending note. But the actual ending note for the episode is, as is tradition, this is the second year, but it's now tradition. We'll be calling each other till the end of our lives doing this. Um,
I
Can't wait.
can't wait.
we're all choosing personal words of the year. Because I think it's a good way to look back on the year and just kind of try to think about if there were any uniting themes. I'm going to cheat and go first by choosing two words, which is the combined phrase good grief,
This is such a
which
you phrase. Oh my God.
I know it is obviously popularized by Charlie Brown from hit cartoon Peanuts, which is old and it's not that new, but I have been watching the Peanuts holiday specials as a form of nostalgia, and that is part of the reason why I choose it. But I also think there is something interesting in the phrase, which is that this year has been hard for, I think, everyone, like probably everyone, maybe not the people who were in the Imagine video earlier, but everyone else. And a big moment for me this year was when I kind of let myself feel bad for what was happening this year. Like a lot of my plans were being canceled. I am, of course, very fortunate in many ways, but I think everyone just allowing themselves to kind of grieve for the lives that they're not living. I've not seen a lot of people this year because I simply cannot. And allowing us
certain kind of grief into my life has really helped me get through some of the harder points of it, without getting too emotional. I feel like I've gone too dark, but I also think in general, American society looks down on grief, and I think bringing it back is a way. And I think the phrase good grief we think of grief as a bad thing, but there is good grief. It's an important emotion to feel once in a while.
I think that's interesting because we've really gone through a whole cycle with COVID and quarantine and everything that it's brought with it. The cycle of realizing that it's here, reckoning with the changes, and then grieving them. And now, what I think is really interesting that will continue into 2021 is the fact that you have to qualify your grief by saying, well, of course, like there are people who are in worse positions and my grief isn't as bad as theirs. And we're sort of doing that almost like a comparison trap with how bad our grief is compared to others and qualifying it when really like you're just as validated to grieve your stuff as everyone else, which I think is a very interesting whole like exhausting full cycle thing we've gone through this year.
Yeah. Well, hopefully one of you will bring the mood to a higher crescendo for the end of the episode, but I'll go next to Dylan.
Yeah, so mine is way less serious than yours. But anyway, mine is actually a name, but also a word. And it is Dua, as in Dualipa, the pop star. No one is surprised by this. But so I chose it for two reasons. The first is that Dua Lipa released her new album just before I think we all went into quarantine earlier this year. And that, of course, is her album Future Nostalgia, which is awesome and amazing. And I love it. And I think it helped a lot of us, at least me, get through part of this year because it's really fun and poppy and just like nice to like dance to and bop to. So I think it just lifted some spirits. But also I found out, so Dua Lipa is British Albanian. And I found out Dua means love or want in Albanian. And so I thought that was kind of nice too, because a couple things out of this year is that we really had to like tune into love, to things that we love and people that we love, to kind of survive. And also want is what we want for the future, which is for things to get better, right? So I thought that was perfect that her name means those things. And mostly I just wanted to talk about Dua Lipa because she's amazing.
She was one of my top played songs this year, or top played artist in my Unwrapped. But also I have the dumbest question. Is Dua Lipa her real name?
Yes, it is her given name. Yeah.
What? I assumed it was like a Lady Gaga situation.
I also thought that.
That's amazing.
And I think Lipa is like, from what I could tell, it comes from Polish and it is related to like lime trees. But okay. I couldn't like fully confirm that, but maybe it's a love of lime trees.
That's incredible. I love her even more now.
Fascinating. All right, well, let's end on Jen.
So I have a word, but it's sort of more wrapped up in this philosophy, which I'm going to apologize in advance. I've been listening to a lot of interviews from Barack Obama for his new book. Aww. And it really, really got me thinking this weekend. But my word of the year is intensify, which is a transitive verb that means to make more intense. But more helpfully, it means to sharpen or make more acute. And I think there's two reasons this word comes to mind for 2020. I think first, because we get our news and our information through this like 24/7 news coverage and social media, Google algorithms, everything feels like the most extreme version of itself. Like nothing was a half measure this year. Everything was just like full on intensity. And I think you guys felt it. I felt it.
Yes, 100%.
So I think part of it was like we felt simultaneously sort of felt our society growing more politically divided because these algorithms amplify the most extreme opinions, and there's kind of like less gray area for us to actually have discussion, and it's more just like reaction versus rational thought. Sort of the second reason, though, I chose this is because a lot of things we took for granted, like relationships and ideologies and ways of working, our health, science, our habits, a lot of things have been challenged because of everything we've gone through this year. But in some ways, it's accelerated the way we think about maybe some outdated institutions or traditional structures. So, like, we're thinking more about remote work. It's been a thing that we can actually do for a long time. But now it's actually we're making real progress to maybe actually having these remote workforces, especially in tech. We're seeing a lot of companies offer remote work, which could potentially democratize more people to have jobs in the future they would normally not have access to. We're talking about more constraints on executive power in our government, which I think is a welcome discussion after this year.
Yes.
We're even talking more about healthcare, and healthcare is a human right, and universal healthcare, which is something I feel very strongly about, but I think is a good discussion to have as a result of everything that's happening. So it's been a lot, but I think there will hopefully be some silver linings and growth out of this year. And I think it's interesting to think about like this verb that means to make things more intense, and some of the challenges, but also the fact that like it is kind of a potentially a thing that will accelerate growth in other areas. I do think that constant intensity, though, for everyone has been exhausting. I think a lot this year about that. I think it's a misattributed Chinese proverb, "May you live in interesting times." Came from or at least was popularized from a Robert F. Kennedy speech in the 60s, and it's actually unclear exactly where it came from. But I don't know about you guys. I'm ready for boring times.
Please.
A yoga retreat for next year.
Yeah.
Please. Yeah, I mean, you make a great point, and I think I would add to that like other conversations too, like climate change, because we kind of saw emissions drop for a bit when everyone stopped going places and doing things. And also like wages for our essential workers, like grocery store workers and restaurant people, delivery people. So many important conversations that came up. But you're right. It is time for a break, for a rest, please. No more interesting times.
That's a great note to end on, because we all here at Bella wish you a good break and rest over these next few weeks. And yeah, thank you, Jen and Dylan, for joining me to talk about the 2020 words of the year.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, Thomas.
Multilinguish is a production of the language app Babbel. This episode was produced by me, Thomas Devlin, with help from Dylan Lyons and Jen Jordan. Editing and sound design by Brian Rosato. You can read about today's topic and more on Babbel Magazine. Just visit babbel.com/magazine. Say hi on social media by finding us at Babbel USA. Finally, please rate and review this podcast. We really appreciate it. Multilinguish will be back to its regularly scheduled Season 3 episodes in 2 weeks. Until then, we wish you all a safe and happy holiday season.